Language is powerful stuff, and we're going to look at some ways that how language is powerful stuff. So first off, let's go ahead and look at a few things in terms of control mechanisms. And by control mechanism, this is a tricky thing because it starts, you start saying things like this, and some people might get the idea that we're talking about conspiracies and brainwashing and sort of, I don't know, hard to believe things. But the fact of the matter is that we are subject to various mechanisms of control all the time, whether it's from advertisers or from our government or from authority figures of any kind. People use language in relationships and in marriages, in families, in schools to create and form and shape how we think. And when I talk about control mechanisms, especially with destructive cults, I'm talking about undue influence, which means the idea of using language without you really knowing that's what's going on or really being aware of what's happening. And that's when things get really tricky and can potentially get really destructive. In other words, not necessarily, things don't necessarily happen for your benefit or in your best interest. So it's a really good idea to know about this and be aware of how language is utilized around you all the time to get you to say and do and think certain things. And the more you know, the more aware you can be, and the more power of choice you have over your own thoughts and words and action. So in terms of cult control mechanisms, there are actually quite a few. Loaded language is but one of them. There's also installed phobias and fears. There's the mechanism of confession and the use of guilt. There is just flat out deception or being lied to. There is the suppression of thinking for yourself, which sort of underlies maybe all of these things to one degree or another. There's also a thing called sacred science. This is a characteristic of destructive cults. The beliefs and regulations of the group are framed as perfect, absolute, and non-negotiable. The dogma of the group is presented as scientifically correct or otherwise unquestionable. And this, especially in the modern age, sacred science is used quite a bit because science has a great deal of authority and acceptability for people. So if they believe that something is scientific, then they will buy it or buy into it. And it becomes its own sort of sacred cow, which is where the term sacred science comes from. Furthermore, rules and processes are therefore to be followed without question, and any transgression is a sin, and hence requires atonement or other forms of punishment, as does consideration of any alternative viewpoints. So sacred science is quite a powerful mechanism in itself, and I could do a whole podcast on that, and maybe at some point in the future we will. And of course, there are many other characteristics and tools or mechanisms of destructive cults. But now, what is loaded language? Basically, this is done by inventing new words or repurposing existing ones. And also getting rid of words that are not wanted, that express concepts or ideas that maybe cult leaders or authority figures don't want their followers ever thinking about. So the language, when we're talking about loaded language, these things help foster special feelings of secret knowledge and sacred science. When you have new words, new ideas, or concepts being expressed by these words, or you modify words, then the people who begin using that vocabulary feel like they have something that no one else has. They have information or knowledge that is special and interesting and new and different. And they therefore feel like they are more important or more knowledgeable than they really are. And that can be its own kind of dangerous thing for somebody, because if that information or knowledge or language that they think they have isn't really based on fact, if it's pseudoscientific, if it's based on some, ramblings of some madman as a destructive cult leader, let's say, then their knowledge is just exaggerated, puffed up buffoonery, really. But within the group, the individuals within the group will use this language with each other and enforce it on each other also, which is where you get this sacred science business, where people will, if somebody starts disagreeing with the dogma as expressed through the language and words of the group, then that person can end up having to make amends, be put into a lot of trouble, and even be kicked out of the group entirely. Some other things about loaded language is it helps create an us versus them mentality. And like I was just going over, it makes the individuals feel special or unique or different for having this information. It also allows the individuals in the group to feel that people who aren't in the group, who don't have this special knowledge, who don't use this special language or these special words, are not as good as they are not as privileged, are not as honored or special or intelligent or wise. And so they can separate themselves and create an exclusivity and sort of, build walls rather than bridges because they feel that they have this special information. Another aspect of this is it helps the group members themselves feel closer and feel like they understand each other better, just between each other, right? Because these words are being used to express ideas or concepts that they understand between themselves. Whether these things are really based on fact or not, if everybody in the group thinks they are, then there's a certain degree of truth that builds up between the group members about these kinds of things. An example of this might be in Scientology, the concept of ARC, Affinity, Reality, and Communication. This is a very commonly used term in Scientology, and it becomes a part of the language where affinity, which is how much you like something or how close you want to be to something. Reality is how much you agree with a thing, and communication is obviously being able to interact or interchange with another person or thing. And you combine these, and L. Ron Hubbard says that these three factors are what make up understanding. So Scientologists all agree that this is a universal truth, even though plenty of examples can be given that show that it's not. However, among Scientologists, they really believe that ARC and the ARC triangle equal understanding in all cases, without exception. And so they feel closer to one another when they say things like, I have a lot of ARC for you, right? Or, boy, there was really an ARC break there, meaning there was some cutting of affinity, reality, or communication, and therefore understanding between that person and somebody else. Yeah, I had a real ARC break with my wife. Instantly communicates something to another Scientologist that there is some kind of an upset or disagreement or fight, whereas out to anybody who's not a Scientologist, they have no idea what the hell you just said. So there is this degree of closeness that occurs because of this kind of language.